Um, Seek refuge in God from Satan, the rejected. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. So today's topic for our first khutbah today is the power of words. Seek refuge in God from Satan, the rejected. Let's see. Okay. So the power of words. Words, as we all know, especially in these times, carry weight. They're more than sounds. They carry meaning, power, and influence. And every word that we speak, every word that we utter, has the potential to heal or to hurt others, to inspire or discourage, and to bring peace or even sow conflict. Words reflect the state of our hearts and the shape of the world around us. So, in today's khutbah, we want to pause and consider the impact that our words can have on the people around us, even in our online digital world, even the impact of our words on people that we may not know, and how we can use our words for goodness and to spread mercy, and avoid using them for harm or destructive purposes. So this quote is by Rudyard Kipling, the celebrated author, who said, "Words are, of course, the most powerful drug used by mankind." There are a lot of quotes that come to mind when we think about the power of words and speech and writing. The pen is mightier than the sword. So these are all just great ideas to reflect on during today's khutbah. So we'd like you to think about a time that someone said something hurtful to you. Think about whether they meant to hurt you or not. And regardless of that, how did it make you feel? If you can think about times in your life that unfortunately, we've all gone through that maybe someone has said words to you that were hurtful and it stuck with you. And think about how long just those words stayed with you. Maybe they still stay with you. And you might still feel the impact of those words even today. Now, in contrast, we also want you to think about a time that someone said something kind to you. What do you think their intention was? And try to think about how it made you feel. Maybe, hopefully, some of the words that people have said to you that have improved your mood or made you feel better about yourself still stay with you as well, just as much as negative words have. Um, and when you feel the impact of those words now, try to reflect on how it can elicit emotions even now, much later in time than that conversation occurred. So, reflecting on those, it's obvious that words stay with us. What you might have found with that exercise is that days, weeks, months, maybe even years later, you can still feel the impact of someone else's words on you. Whether that was good or bad, both kinds of words and speech will stay with us, for a lot of us. But unfortunately, it is often the negative words and feedback, that stays with us longer or feels more potent to us than the kind words. I want to point that out because, we have to consider the impact that our words have on us when we express them to other people, knowing how much it can impact ourselves. So words have a real ability to heal other people, to heal ourselves even, to soothe, to celebrate, but also to damage, to hurt, and to tear apart. Um, and so just want to really emphasize that what you say matters. As submitters, we spend a lot of our time thinking and planning out our actions, like our prayers, our zakat, our behavior from day to day. But how much time do we actually spend planning out our words? This is definitely a great exercise for me as I'm kind of going through this with my aunt's words. It's a very, unique situation. How often do we speak without really thinking and reflecting before letting those words come from our mouths? And how often do we speak without uttering something hurtful or saying something that is not true or something that we're not even fully knowledgeable about? How often do we snap at others? Maybe family members or even colleagues. Sometimes the people that we spend the most time with and are closest to us are the people that we might lose patience with, the easiest. When we pause to consider the impact of our words, we, sorry, we start to see them not simply as speech, but as spoken actions, because what we say is what we think, and what we do and what we believe. So, even though it's just words, a harsh word can feel as physical as a slap, and a kind word can feel as physical as a warm hug. When we think of words this way, our perspective really changes because our speech is no longer just noise. It becomes an actual tool, and it becomes a tool that we can use for specific purposes like healing, guiding, connecting, or, if you misuse it or use it without intention, and without reflection, it can also be used for harm. So, what are some lessons about words and their impact that we can look at the Quran for? For one thing, the Quran advises us to reflect on the accountability that we have for our speech. So, I seek refuge in God from Satan, the rejected. In 33:70, it says, O you who believe, reverence God and utter only the correct utterances. So obviously, this is preaching that the words that we say should be truthful, they should be just, and they should be mindful as well. The Quran also advises about caution in speech. So 1736, you shall not accept any information unless you verify it for yourself. I have given you the hearing, the eyesight, and the brain, and you're responsible for using them. So God is instructing us in the Quran to verify the words that come to us and the information that comes to us from others by using our own cognitive abilities and our own discernment. God also advises us to speak kindly. So in 283, God says, we made a covenant with the children of Israel. You shall not worship except God. You shall honor your parents and regard the relatives, the orphans, and the poor. You shall treat the people amicably. You shall observe the contact prayer salat and give the obligatory charity zakat. But you turned away except a few of you, and you became averse. So part of treating people amicably, as it preaches in this verse, is definitely going to involve speaking kind words. And this is in the same verse, notably, where God mentions worshiping Him alone, honoring your parents, and giving to the poor. So it really shows how important, um, amicable behavior and kind treatment of people, which involves how you speak to them, really is. Some more verses in 242, God talks about truthfulness and again, careful speech. So, do not confound the truth with falsehood, nor shall you conceal the truth knowingly. And in addition to speaking only true words, God advises us to avoid idle talk and gossip. So in 49:12, God says, O you who believe, you shall avoid any suspicion, for even a little bit of suspicion is sinful. You shall not spy on one another, nor shall you backbite one another. This is as abominable as eating the flesh of your dead brother. You certainly abhor this. You shall observe God. God is Redeemer, most merciful. Again, God reminds us to be mindful when we speak. In 33:70, O you who believe, reverence God and utter only the correct utterances. And in a from our earlier ideas in the Khutbah, God reminds us that our words and our speech have power to help or to harm. In 1424, do you not see that God has cited the example of the good word as a good tree whose root is firmly fixed and its branches are high in the sky? Obviously, we know from seeing storms across the country or things like that, a tree with good roots will survive wind and rain, but a plant with weak roots will not be able to withstand hardship, I should say. So we can see the example of the power of our good words being able to root us in our true characters. In addition to the Quran, there are also many passages and advice about how we should conduct our words and speech in the Old Testament. So there is mention about the control of the tongue in Psalms 141. God says, set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips. In the Proverbs, it talks about words as life or death, saying, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." Another mention in the Proverbs is advising us to avoid deceit or slander, and again, using our words for good, saying, "A perverse man spreads strife, and a whisperer separates close friends." And another one in Proverbs talks about the power to encourage and spread the truth, saying, "Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the bones." In the New Testament, it also talks about the power of our words and how we choose to use them, especially when we speak with grace and wisdom. So in Colossians, "Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." And in Ephesians, it says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." It also talks about how the words that we speak reflect on our character and our heart. In Luke, it says that the good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And in Matthew, it reads, "But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them." Also in the New Testament, it advises us to speak truthfully in Ephesians. "Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body." And it warns against using words as poison. In James, it says, "No human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison." That's an interesting verse. It reminds me of some of the verses in the Quran that say that the human being is argumentative. So it seems that those ideas align between the scriptures, in which we will focus on the impact of words on entire countries, populations, and movements, which I think we all know, especially those of us living in the US, how powerful words can be in inspiring people or motivating people towards one movement or another. So these are examples of words that have caused harm historically throughout the world. The first one, probably one of the most infamous examples, is Nazi propaganda, which was spread in 1930s and 40s Germany. So the context of this, obviously, this was after World War I. Germany had suffered losses and was therefore in an economic collapse and facing a lot of political turmoil, and people were really desperate for stability. So knowing that Hitler and his Nazi supporters were very intentional with their speeches, they controlled the media and they spread messages that would encourage people to hold on to those ideas as a way to feel stable and in control. A lot of those messages touted racial superiority, anti-Semitism. They kind of played on this idea of uniting people by creating this fake um, common enemy in Jews. And they also managed to hide all this under the guise of nationalism and a way to reawaken their nation. They would use terms like comparing Jews to parasites and enemies of the state, tying that nationalism to morality and just creating a false narrative. Obviously, as we all know, the impact was that millions were indoctrinated to hate or at least comply and participate in systematic genocide. And it not only influenced leaders in that nation and around the world, but made ordinary citizens, ordinary people, ordinary neighbors complicit in allowing Jews and other persecuted populations to be snatched up during that time. So we can reflect on this and understand and really consider the weight of manipulative and persuasive words and how they can prompt people to believe or act in ways that they might have previously thought unthinkable. Um, And also understand that there is a huge moral responsibility, especially when it comes to public speech and when it comes to the speech and media that leadership produces. Over on our side of the Atlantic, we'll recall the US fears of communism globally, which was something that arose in the 1950s. The context of this was that during the Cold War, communism and its spread globally was seen as an attack against, the United States systems of independence and capitalism. And Senator Joseph McCarthy explicitly exploited this fear, accusing thousands of Americans and residents of being communist or commie sympathizers would be the term. So this was related to, the whole Red Scare. Um, and the words that were used, things like the Red Scare and creating these connotations that didn't really exist and these negative connotations. Um, it encouraged people to make public accusations, even if they lacked evidence. But the repetition of these accusations and the authority behind them would give them made up credibility. So, people were labeled as enemies of the state or enemies of America just based off of suspicion. As a result, ordinary people's careers were destroyed, their families were torn apart, and a lot of people felt fear at just speaking their minds and practicing their First Amendment right to free speech. Um, and what we can take away from this is that even though there was no physical onslaught, there weren't people out in the streets uh, grabbing people off of them like there are now. But even just words back then, without any physical force or physical presence, were able to terrify, oppress, and separate communities. Another example is the Rwandan genocide in the 90s. So, the context of this, Rwanda had a tense history between the Hutu majority and the Tutsi minority. Um, I will say I'm obviously not as knowledgeable about this one, so I won't pretend to be. Political manipulation and economic struggles had already created a lot of mistrust. And so, again, the state used this to create a narrative that people would cling to for a sense of stability, even if it was a false narrative. So, radio stations, most notably the television Libre de Miacoinis, repeatedly broadcast messages calling Tutsis cockroaches, implying a subhuman status and a threat to society. The impact here was very extreme. Ordinary citizens were persuaded to commit acts of extreme violence against their neighbors, their friends, and even family. A lot of fear, hatred was allowed to grow and encouraged to grow, and ultimately led to the mass killing of over 800,000 people in about 100 days. Um, so here we can reflect that especially repeated harmful words, from state media, from these places of authority in human society can also be even a form of brainwashing, normalizing violence and destroying the community that's needed to maintain a social fabric, of a functioning society. Um, so those are all examples of the ways that words can be used to manipulate people towards violence and hatred. But now we're going to take a look at examples of when speech and words and rhetoric can be used for good. Here in the US, that one of the most famous examples is the Gettysburg Address from 1863. So this was following the US Civil War, which was mostly about, statehood as well as states' rights to maintain slavery. Um, it was, the Civil War, which caused unprecedented death and division. And obviously, with civil wars, there is an underlying current of division and misery because it's all internal. And at the time, Abraham Lincoln addressed a crowd at the dedication of a cemetery for fallen soldiers. And we might not know is that it was actually a very short speech. It was about 270 words. Um, and Lincoln was able to reframe the Civil War as not just a disagreement internally, but a struggle for national purpose, liberty, and equality, and was able to unify the people in that even if they had opposing ideas, the main idea was that everyone wanted the best for their state and their communities. So his speech gave a lot of meaning to the late soldier's sacrifice. It unified the entire nation under a common morality, and it also reinforced democratic principles at a time when those principles were very much at risk. So again, given the very short nature of this speech, it teaches us that even very brief words can resonate if they are deliberate, and they can last for generations and shape an entire society and community's collective memory and purpose. So this is the actual text, and it's so short that it fits, in one paragraph. But it goes to show that succinct and purposeful words, can make an impact again across generations and across even cultures. So I suppose if anyone wants to look at this, they can see it here or look it up online. The next example of words being used for good is Mahatma Gandhi's advocacy in the early 20th century. I think it's pretty well known by now that he was a bit more controversial than we initially thought, but he did contribute to India's independence movement. So we will just take a look at that today. So for context, India was under British colonial rule for a very long time. And despite efforts, these violent uprisings were not succeeding in gaining India its independence. So Gandhi took a different approach and he wrote and spoke extensively about satyagraha, which is the truth force, the force of truth, as well as nonviolent resistance. So he inspired his people to resist oppression without bloodshed. So his philosophy and his words mobilized millions of Indians to participate in nonviolent protests and boycotts and what we know as civil disobedience, which eventually, it helped contribute to India's independence in 1947. So a lesson here, which reflects what the Quran teaches us, is that words grounded in truth and morality and patience can catalyze profound social change even without violence or physical means. So here's some quotes from Gandhi. He said, "In a gentle way, you can shake the world." He also said that infamous quote, "You must be the change you wish to see in the world." Um, Another good one is, "The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others." And I like this last one. "Whatever you do may be insignificant, but it is very important that you do it." I think that definitely speaks to one person's ability to contribute to the overall good, or an overall movement, whether it's good or bad. There's a quote that says, "Words create worlds." Words can heal or harm, they can build up or break down, and they can guide entire nations or disseminate, completely destroy nations. They can also wound a single person's heart. All of that to say that every word carries weight. Every word that we speak or write carries weight. Words also shape our realities and the realities of those around us. They can be misused to fuel hatred and incite violence against people. They can divide communities, and they can change how someone even feels about themselves in a negative way. But in contrast, we have to remember that when words are used with wisdom, they can inspire justice, they can bring comfort, they can lead people out of the darkness and into the light, as the Quran talks about and exemplifies, and they can change how someone feels about themselves in a positive light. So with all of that, we need to remember that we have a responsibility when we speak and when we write and communicate, and remember that speech is an action and that we have to treat it as such. We need to choose the truth over rumors when we speak. We need to choose compassion over cruelty, and we especially need to choose patience over anger or reactions. Um, and this is a great reminder to speak only what you are willing to be accountable for, because you will be, and we all will be. From a personal perspective, and I know this is advice that I can take for myself, in our own homes and with our own families, again, sometimes the people that we love the most and are the closest to are the people that we lose patience with the most often. So we need to remember that a gentle word can calm a storm, a hard word can scar a heart, and that kindness spoken today will always become a memory for tomorrow and beyond. Um, and that lastly, again, the people that are closest to us feel our words the most and need to be treated with that consideration the most. In contrast, in public, so in our workplaces and our communities, especially on social media and on the internet and any digital technology, we have to remember that there is someone else on the other side of a message or a screen, and that any of the words that we use towards them can uplift or humiliate them, can include or exclude them or other people's, and that our voices, especially nowadays, have more reach than we think. So when using our voices, we have to remember that it reflects not only our opinions, but our characters and our beliefs. And especially as, self-proclaimed Muslims, we want to be aware of how we present ourselves to the world. So some last reminders: don't save your good words just for public use. Sometimes the people that get the worst side of us, the most articulate and patient and thoughtful parts of us, are those closest to us. So we want to keep that in mind no matter who we're interacting with. So some parting thoughts. Before you speak, remember to reflect and ask yourself if what you are saying and expressing is true, if it's kind, if it's necessary, and again, if it's something that a submitter and a Muslim would say, and also, most importantly, if it's something that God would approve of or disapprove of, if it's something that will bring us closer to God or farther away. So with all of that, let's conclude and pray.